All right, welcome back. So in this training video, we're going to be talking about the moral argument. And the moral argument is, I would say, top five, but if not one of the top couple most powerful arguments against atheism. Um, so Ravi Zacharias points out, and this is, I think, based on Aristotle's assessment of what being is, but Ravi said you have to, in order to have a coherent worldview, you have to say, who are we? Where are we going? Why are we here? Where did we come from? Where are we going? So like what created us? Where are we going? What is the purpose for our existence? And now I'm getting lost. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And what's the purpose for our existence? All religions attempt to assess those four things, and those are the four causes. And when you're talking about atheism and an atheistic or naturalistic worldview, who are we? Well, for starters, we are bowls of slime. We're cell bags or flesh meat bags, whatever you want to call us. We have no purpose. We have no intrinsic value because we were created entirely by chance. What created us? The Big Bang, which itself was a fluctuation from nothing and was itself chance. We then fell together in a puddle of soup, which created the first cell and evolved from there through time and random chance. And so here you are. Where are we going? Well, humans, when you die, there is nothing spiritual, there is nothing metaphysical. It is only the physical. And when you die, it won't even be blackness because your consciousness is just your brain and you will cease to exist and your cells will go into the ground and that's it. And then what happens to the universe? Well, the universe, because of I believe the first, or I don't remember which thermodynamic law, but entropy always increases in the universe, meaning things spread apart. And so as galaxies spread apart, as the universe continues to expand, the universe itself will continue to cool off from the initial explosion of the Big Bang, which is when it was at the lowest point of interest in entropy. It's all crammed together into a super hot, infinitely small ball, and it's spreading out and cooling off. Well, what will happen is all the energy will basically end in a state of zero, and everything dies. The universe is done, and that is called the heat death of the universe. Why is it heat? I don't know, because it's actually really cold, and that'll be in like 10 trillion years or something. So that is the assessment of the worldview of atheism or naturalism, and they don't have answers. Where do we come from? Chance. Where are we going? Nowhere. Who are you? Nothing important. There are terrible answers to these questions, and in some cases, non-answers. And so in regard to morality, where do we get morals? Why should I not, go over to Zach's house right now and fillet him up and eat him for dinner? Like, why is cannibalism wrong? Why is it wrong for Hitler to kill the Jews? Because if you ask someone, was it wrong for Hitler to kill the Jews? We all know that is morally reprehensible, and yet it happened. So why is it wrong? And so the moral argument seeks to establish a ground. So it's called moral grounding, a philosophical grounding point for immorality or evil. And you cannot really accomplish this with evolution. What the theist, at least, people in Judaism, in Islam, and in Christianity would say is there is an all-powerful God who itself or himself or whatever defines morality because by nature it is moral, and we can therefore say murder is bad because God says murder is bad. And this is all of philosophy, Western philosophy, up to the point of the Enlightenment, which was around the 1650s, when basically people said, well, we don't need God, we'll define morality ourselves because also we're atheists. That's where this started coming from. And they have attempted and failed for the last, 350 or 450 years, however long it is, to define a grounds for morality. So there are some grounds for morality that they will claim and we can assess those. But the theist, the person who believes in one loving God, would say morality is grounded in God's character, God's nature, and therefore evil stuff is bad. Any questions on that before we get further into the specific arguments for grounding morality if you are an atheist and where you have to go with this? Nope. How you doing, Michael? Doing good. You're good.
I'm good.
You're all right. I
Yeah.
know it's been a long day. I know it's super late over there. Thank you for being here. All right. Okay, so if you're an evolutionist, if you're a naturalist, how do you ground your morality? So you would say either, well, if you're being intellectually honest, in my opinion, you would just say, well, we have no grounds for morality in any objective way. So really, you just decide what's evil. Okay, well, that's crazy town. But that's what you would say because there is no ground for morality. But what we do is we have different types of relativism. Okay, so relativism means that morality is relative to a thing. So, for example, moral relativism is, let's say, individuals for a person. Individual relativism, moral relativism to the person would say, well, each person decides what is good and evil for themselves. So, hey, it's, whatever you believe is what you believe, and what I believe is what I believe, and it's all true. And this is very Oprah-y. And so this would mean that if Michael said that murder is evil, and I said murder is like run of the mill every day, no big deal, we're both right. And murder then is no different than personal taste. Like Michael likes broccoli and I don't like broccoli. That is essentially what we have now made morality. It is just a personal preference, and there is nothing that can be said beyond that point. So if I show up at Michael's house and I just axe him, and I know this is like really extreme language, but this is called a reductio de absurdum argument. I am reducing the logic to the most absurd. So a lot of times in these moral conversations, you'll be talking about Hitler and these different things. It's not to be over the top intentionally, but to show the breakdown of the logic. But if I just show up at Michael's house and I believe it's fine for me to just axe him and then eat him at his own dining table, there's nothing morally wrong with that because I believe that it's okay for me. And so that is moral relativism. And obviously, morality breaks down, and the vast majority of the people in the world would say, that's insane. You're a madman. So if the person that you're talking to says, well, okay, well, yeah, I guess it's wrong to murder and eat people at their own dining tables. Well, really, morality comes from the culture. Okay, so we've moved them. Now, what happens if they don't move? They say, well, yeah, that is fine for you. Okay, well, then you're talking to someone who's completely unreasonable and obviously unsound in their ability to reason, and they might try to murder and eat you. So leave that person alone. Anyway, but let's say, they're like, okay, I see how that's completely unreasonable. People can't just make up whatever they believe is moral. Then they will move. So that is moral relativism on an individual level. Then they might say, well, cultures decide what's moral. And then the question becomes, okay, so you're telling me that culturally it was completely moral and completely fine for Hitler to kill all of the handicapped people, mentally handicapped people, homosexuals, and Jews, 6 million of them, and genocide all of them. That was moral because it was culturally acceptable in Germany in the 1940s. And if they say yes, again, you're talking to a crazy person and you just got to let it go. But a reasonable person is going to go, oh, yeah, I guess culture really doesn't determine morality. And then they might go over to something you call, I'm just making up names at this point, but will the law or the country, national or legal moral relativism, however they're going to try to ground the morals in the law or in the nation state. So the king determines morality. Okay, well, great. So, my king or my president makes a law that says murder is bad, but Michael's king or president or whoever makes a law saying murder is great. So now who's right? Because according to Michael's King's relativism, it's totally fine for Michael to show up at my house and axe me and eat meat. So that's obviously ridiculous if you believe it's actually wrong for anybody to axe anybody and eat anybody. That's just craziness. So where can you ultimately ground morality that doesn't end up being relative? Well, nowhere. Another one, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I think Sam Harris takes the contractarian stance, which is,
No, he takes moral naturalism, which is that
oh,
moral standards can be derived from the natural world.
oh, excellent. Okay, well, you clearly know that one better than I do at this point. Someone, and I don't remember who, but contra takes, I don't remember which atheist. It's one of the four horsemen, I think. But anyway, they take a contractarian stance, which is, well, we all sort of just agree upon the what's best for everybody because we have to live in the same society and the same contract. So we all sort of have this unwritten contract that we agree on, and that's how we know what morality is. And that's also ridiculous because it's like, well, what about the tribe of cannibals that's in the middle of the ocean that has never seen the rest of the world? They have a different contract. So are you telling me that morality is actually just coming from what everybody sort of kind of agrees on? And, what happens if there's an alien civilization and they believe it's moral to go and harvest the resources of, I mean, you can really posit this. This is legitimate. This is maybe called a possible worlds. This is actually a mental model, by the way, but could it be that in a possible world there's an alien race out there who thinks it's totally moral to go around planet to planet and just glass the whole planet with their laser beams and then harvest it for resources to fund their ever-growing space civilization? Yes, it's possible. Well, would it be moral for them to do that? No, you can't come to Earth and kill 6 billion people. That's immoral. That's evil. Well, I thought you just said it was based on the social contract, and their social contract says it's not evil. So is it evil or is it not evil? Well, now you have two social contracts, so you have two moralities. And so again, morality just becomes an opinion. So those are an overview: individual relativism, moral relativism, cultural. There's also time. Well, morals evolve over time. And again, you could just go back to Hitler and say, okay, so you're telling me that in the 1940s in Germany, it was completely acceptable to murder Jews. And if they say yes, they're obviously crazy. And everybody listening is like, oh, okay, I'm not a moral relativist. And then you leave them alone. But you have time, the nation, the culture, contract, social contracts. Those are some places that people have attempted over the past few hundred years to ground morality that, I mean, all are very obviously a failure. So anyway, Zach, I don't know if you want to speak to the one that you're aware of there.
They're all so much fun. This is my favorite one. Because it really becomes a simple question of why. You can just ask why. They have to ground it somewhere. That's kind of the whole.
We lost you. Mic's off. There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, the problem is that they can't ground it. They cannot.
Yep.
And whereas we ground ours in, they might reduce it to something that in their minds is silly. So they might say, well, we just do what God says to do. And while as practicing Christians, we do strive to do that, we might ground it in something a little bit more abstract, but still divine. It could be the value of human life as posited by God. He made humans in the image of God. He assigned us value because he says we're valuable. We
Mm-hmm.
then attempt to do things that are moral in accordance with the presupposed value of human life. And that's the grounding, right? A lot of them go back to the same place or try to, where it's the value of human life. But unfortunately, the question of why cannot be answered at some point. So
Yes.
when you're talking about moral naturalism, that one's absurd. It's basically saying that you can observe the natural world, and then based on the way the natural world works, we can derive moral standards from that.
Is there a particular example by chance?
Yeah, so I mean, you could look at the law of reciprocity, right? That
Uh-huh.
would be something that would be considered natural because that evolved over time, presumably.
Yes.
Well, the law of reciprocity works for some societies over
And
time, and it works well. But then there's others that seem to be able to propagate over time without the law of reciprocity, at least not with it to its fullest extent. There were um, civilizations like the ones that inhabited South America, right, where there was tons and tons of cannibalism and that was certainly not reciprocal, and yet they still somehow managed to propagate over time. And so
maybe they
is
reciprocated
that
their cannibalism.
yeah, if you eat me, then I'll eat you. We trade arms. So um again though, you see things in nature that would not bespeak what we would consider to be moral actions at all. How does the lion survive? It goes and eats and kills anything of a lower species.
You read my note.
It Yeah, did I? It goes to competing male lions' prides.
Yep.
It kills the male lion. It kills all of the kids that that lion had, and then it copulates with all of the women
Forcibly.
of
It
that pride.
forcibly
Yeah,
copulates. It
forcibly
rapes
copulates.
if it had morals. Yes.
Yes, there's not a moral standard to be derived from that whatsoever.
Well,
Yet
and not only
moral
that.
moral naturalism would at least say we have to really observe it and see if there's
Yes.
something there.
Well, and not only that though, because you're making a negative argument, you're making an argument against moral naturalism. You can take that and make a positive argument against it as well. Is well, the reason why we have these sort of things like reciprocity and we work together in societies is because humans evolved and realized that it was easier to band together in numbers. And so we socialized and that became a part of our genes and all this stuff. And it's like, and they'll cite survival of the fittest. And it's like, well, maybe, but firstly, show me evidence of that. And they're like, well, here we are. That's the evidence. Well, let me ask you a different question. Wouldn't it have been equally as likely for us, like lions, we're apex predators. The lions are apex predators. Wouldn't have been equally as likely for all of us to just be psychopaths and murder and kill anybody that is in our way so that we're the biggest dog on the block and we take the wives we want for ourselves and we steal all of the other men's stuff and then we have as many children with as many people as we possibly can to pass down our genes. That is evolution. That is exactly what evolution is, as you just said, with why didn't that happen? Because what you're saying is it didn't happen because look, we're here. And what I'm saying is it seems to me there is a more likely scenario that is morality is actually grounded in a divine source, not in but whatever. There are other very plausible, even more plausible solutions on on evolution than we're all friends and happy and we have somehow morality.
Right. And then you also, again, to build on what you're saying, one of the things that they'll reference is time, right? So you might argue that there's the equal likelihood of the one working and taking the place of the other. Then they might say something to the effect of, well, here we are, right? And so then the question you ask back to them is like, what's the time scale there? Like
Yeah.
maybe it works there's short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategies for everything. The short-term strategies usually work very poorly because we end up living medium or long term.
Mm-hmm.
But then what's longer term than if the United States went and found every country that was not a NATO country that could be bowled over in 2 seconds and then took all of the land and natural resources forcibly because we have the greatest military in the world and it's without a doubt. And then we just get to have that because they have no allies to speak of. No one's in position to
What would be
challenge
wrong
us.
with that? Nothing. Survival of the fittest.
Right, and that's natural. That's the lion
Right.
strategy. That is a moral derived from the natural world.
Yes.
I'm the apex predator, and I'm gonna be the most apex predator of the apex predators, and I'm gonna go and take what there is to be taken because
Yes.
that will benefit me and mine in the long term.
Yes, and the atheist could say nothing about that because that is also you could fully ground that in evolution and say, well, this is just how we are. Okay, so totally agree. One other place, and I've been trying to remember this, that I have heard atheists try to ground morality is pain and pleasure. Well, if it causes pain, it's evil, and if it causes pleasure, it's good. And this is obviously false. But the first time I heard this, I was like, oh, wow, oh my gosh, that's obviously false. There are all kinds of things that are painful that are very good for us. You know, it's really painful for me to wake up as early as I do and grit through 30 minutes until I have coffee. And yet on the back end, turns out that's really good financially, because I actually do work as opposed to
Yes.
sleeping in all morning. It's very painful for people to lose their job because they're lazy and don't do the work. But then I don't know why these are all about work, but apparently that's what I'm thinking about right now. But on the back end, you realize, oh, I need to do a better job. And that pain actually turns into your greatest strength because you learned a lesson from it. And then you're very functional. You're but whatever, you give kids, like with our kids, they have a coin system. We remove coins from them. If they're, we say, hey, you didn't earn your coin for dinner time or for eating your vegetables. If you didn't eat your vegetables, they say, oh, that's painful. We really wished we had earned those coins. And then the next day they eat their vegetables. So pain actually creates good, positive, moral outcomes in many cases. And pleasure, hey, I really enjoy shooting up heroin on a daily basis. That is an immoral thing because it directly leads to your death, or homelessness under a bridge or something. And so pleasure does not equate with positive morality. It can sometimes, but it is not the same thing. So grounding morality and pain and pleasure makes no sense either. And that's another one that
That's utilitarianism.
there you go. There you go. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So that's one. Another thought that I had maybe to throw in here is if you have relative morality, which is what the atheist has, they cannot show and we've just reviewed every ground for morality that I'm aware of, and I've been reading about this for like 10 years. So for whatever that's worth. If you cannot show that morality is objective, how can you have a justice system? Justice is based on the idea that there is an actual right and wrong. And when you have a justice system, but then you say morality is whatever you want it to be, you then have societal breakdown. And this is something I think that you're seeing in the United States right now. You have some people that say it's inhumane to put criminals in prison. And then you have other people who are like, no, they did something actually bad, put them in jail so they learn a lesson. And what do we have? We have the justice system in some cases not actually giving any kind of justice, and they're just letting them back out on the streets because they actually have a different moral system, which is relative in nature. So you can't actually have real justice if you don't have real morals, because justice gives justice for bad morality. So you can't even have laws or justice if you do not have objective morality. There has to be a line somewhere. But on atheism, you do not have any lines because it is all relative. Sweet. Thoughts or questions or
Yeah. Well, the only one that I have is for someone who's actually trying to have this conversation with another person,
yeah.
an atheist, they will not have thought this through.
Okay.
Even the ones who have thought it through to the best of their ability, they can only go so far. And they admit this. They're at least the ones at the tip, at the very top are intellectually honest in the sense that they're saying, well, we're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But everyone
That's
else
intellectually honest, yes.
yeah, everyone else that you bump into is not going to have ever thought this through. And so instead of trying to maybe not beat them over the head, but instead of trying to put forth yours as superior, which it is, just ask a bunch of why questions, which is something that Brett, that you've talked about a whole bunch, right? It's
That is
letting them get the opportunity to speak first.
That is
Um,
partly I think it's called, I could be butchering this, the Socratic questioning method. Socrates just
Yeah.
ask people questions and questions. Yeah. And I find that super helpful. Just like, well, help me understand. Okay. So you're saying like whatever is, more like people, you decide your morality, I decide mine. Yeah. Oh yeah, man. And it's like, well, help me understand. So if I wanted to go and just smash that guy in the face right there, or you in the face, that would be okay. Well, no, that wouldn't be okay. Well, I thought you said I got to choose my morality. I don't understand. Well, okay, there are some things that are wrong. Well, why are some things wrong? Help me understand that. And now we're getting to a cause. So that would be more like a Socratic questioning method for sure.
Yeah. And like a lot of simple arguments that are going to be put forth, and this is one that's used in defense of lots of them. So this is in defense of utilitarianism. This is in defense of social contractarianism. This is in defense of moral relativism even, but primarily those two is the group decides. So
Yep.
if you have 1,000 people and the majority decides the thing is right, basically the
What we
larger the
call
sample
mob rule,
size, yeah, it's tyranny of the masses is
right?
yeah, exactly. So if you have a group of 100 people, this was an argument I put forth against utilitarianism specifically because one person's pleasure could be another person's pain.
Yeah.
But 51 people out of a group of 100 find pleasure in stealing all the possessions of the 49 and then killing them and eating them. You now have a majority rule.
You
So
have you have mostly peaceful riots.
yeah, mostly peaceful rights. Yeah, so you have to take it several layers deep, but they
Right.
fall apart very, very quickly because
Yeah.
they do not have any anchor point.
Right.
Um, Asking why, and then let's see. Specifically with utilitarianism. Oh, there's another one, Brett. I don't know if you hit on it. It's called virtue ethics. Have you heard of that? It was started
Intention.
based on
Isn't that based on intention?
it's virtue ethics. It's based on Aristotle, and it basically says it's focusing on development of the moral character, which is
Mhm.
already
Well, what's that
uh,
mean?
self
Yeah.
defining, right? By pursuit of virtues like courage, wisdom, and compassion. Basically, it's saying there are certain virtues that are considered
Unquestionable.
universally good,
And then the
and then
question there is why. Yes. So they're
yeah,
so now they're saying, well, morality is grounded in the virtues. See, we don't need that. Well, where are the virtues grounded? Where did those come from? That's the same thing. And that goes back to sort of Aristotelian and Socratic and Platonic ideas of an uncaused causer. You got to have a place
yes,
where these are actually
yes,
coming from. You can't just ground them in virtues because the virtue isn't a thing in and of itself. It's got to come from somewhere itself. So great. Now where do
yes,
the virtues come from? Awesome. Well, that's great. That's a lot of fun. Um, so that is the moral argument. And maybe the last thing to throw in here before we wrap it up is when we're discussing, and this is a little side point, but when we're discussing these, we're discussing it in a very academic sort of way. And this is for anybody watching, you know, and this is ammunition. We're giving you critical thinking skills to use in a conversation. Now, the question is, how do you use these? That's a totally different thing. I'm not going to go to the college kid who's an atheist and just drill them with this stuff and be like, oh, you should accept Jesus. I'm never going to do that. I'm going to just listen to them and talk to them and learn about them and have a normal conversation. And when they start bringing up these types of things, then I can address them in a sensitive way, but also like, oh, that's so interesting. Help me understand. That's one that I really go a lot because now they have, because I already know in many cases their position better than they do. And what happens? Well, they have to justify their position to me. And what they realize is that their own position refutes itself in many cases. So on, like moral relativism, another argument against moral relativism is basically you can say all relatives, all morality is relative. What's this? All morality is relative. That is what relativism believes. Well, that is an absolute claim. It is claiming absolutely that all morals are relative. Well, is that true for you, or is that true for everyone? Because what they're saying is relativism is true for everyone, but that's an absolute. Well, where do you get that? Not only that, but you can't have it be an absolute if it's relative. It defeats itself. And when you just ask people these questions, they haven't ever thought about them, like you said, Zach. But you're just asking me, help me understand how can relativity morals be relative for everyone? Isn't that absolute by nature? And they're like, oh, I guess that doesn't really make sense. And so you can have really cordial discussions and you don't have to get into all of the academic stuff. You can just sort of ask the questions as they're relevant and necessary to help them think through their own position and realize, oh, this is a little bit more shifty sand than I thought it was. And a lot of times, if you're doing it in goodwill and good conscience, sorry, it's crazy outside. Um, they'll just say, well, if you've built a good rapport on the front end of that conversation, well, what do you think? And you can say, well, I'd love to share my opinion with you. You know, I don't want to push anything on you, but this is what I think is a better answer. And a lot of times they'll just go, that makes a lot of sense. And they'll just jump on board with you. So there's a way to talk about it. And in this case, we're talking from a very academic and intellectual perspective just to get the facts, but you deliver those in conversation differently. So hopefully that's helpful for anybody watching as well. That will also be on the back end here. That will be in a course on evangelism. So check that course out because I go super in depth there. That one's one of my favorites. It's just got a lot of communication skills in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, what do you got, Zach? You got anything else?
Making sure you know your stuff first. So, Brett, I know you know of the Dunning-Kruger effect,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
yes, these courses, like what you're talking about here, right? We're going over from a very academic perspective. We're also not taking, like there's books on every single one of these. Like
Yes.
there's books on utilitarianism. There's books on virtue ethics. There's books on microevolution versus macro. All this stuff that we found up. Yeah. So before you go into conversation with someone, you know, making sure you've learned
read
it
up.
you've read up exactly.
Yeah.
And then also building on what you were just saying, the good naturedness of the conversation. So like when you said, yeah, Jordan Peterson says always treat the person sitting across from you as if there's something you can learn from them.
Yeah.
And I would say that if you go into a conversation with an agenda, that's
it's
people
known.
can it's known. People can really feel that. Not that you can't have your own positions prepared, but if you in your mind are planning out the 20 moves it takes to get them to checkmate,
yeah,
it could be very stale, very, very, as opposed to
it's gonna
that
feel
genuine,
forced.
yeah, that genuine exploratory questioning of like, well, why do you believe that? Help me understand.
Yes.
It serves the purpose of helping them maybe see some where their own beliefs fall short, where they haven't fully thought them through, but it also gives you an opportunity to very genuinely understand their positions and potentially learn new things.
Yes.
If
And I
nothing
think,
else.
yeah, to build on that, I think that is something, man, we should just add this to the strategy section of the strategy course. But strategy is projecting into the future what will happen if you take this action. Okay. And in a closed system, obviously God can work miracles and move in people's hearts and all this stuff, but I can't control the miracles. I can only control what I can influence. And what I know is I can engage with people because they have human nature. I can engage with people in a particular way, and I can engage with reality. And we're talking about the ideas that we think are real. And I can engage with people and these ideas in a particular way, and then come up with a theory as to how people will respond. And the better we can do that, the more accurately and the more effectively we can speak with people. And this is a great example because, like, when I grew up in church, it's like, hey, you're at the bank. Okay. This is how you share the gospel. You're at the bank and, you're just standing in line. So, hey, just get the guy's attention in front of you and just say, hey, do you know where you're going when you die? And then it's like, there you go. Conversation opener. That's the worst advice I've ever heard in my life. If I'm at the bank and someone asks me if I know where I go when I die, I'm calling the cops and I'm taking that person out so fast. They're going down because that's a stupid thing to ask in a bank. That was actually their example, but it doesn't matter where I'm at. Don't ask me that question anywhere because that makes you a weirdo. And so this is I might say is like over trying. You're trying too hard to share. Like you're trying to force it and it feels uncomfortable. It's like you're pushing your agenda and it's so uncomfortable. And so how do you do this in real life? In real life, you train like we're training right now. You learn all of the permutations of the argument. Oh, you're going to talk to a moral relativist tomorrow or the next day or the next day. And they're either going to try to ground it here, 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 or here. You know the arguments for all of them. Quit thinking about it. You know it. Just let the conversation go wherever it's going to go, and wherever it shows up, you have a response. And that does take a lot of time to curate the responses to that. And you want to try to study up as best you can. What I've learned also in regard to learning things from people is when you get to the point in the argument, in the discussion, I'm still talking philosophically. When you get to the point in the conversation and you don't know what the answer is, you can just tell them, hey, that's a great question. I don't know, but I'd love to look into it and get back to you. And that's real. That's totally fine. And what I've done, I remember the first time I talked to like a Wiccan, a witch. What? You're a what? And I was baffled. And then I went and I researched Wicca and I learned what they believe and why they believe it. And now I can have conversations with Wiccans. And every time when I'm asking them, tell me what you believe. How do you believe that? Especially with New Age people, they all believe different things. So every time I listen and learn what they believe, it's adding to my own knowledge base to assess their worldview for truth value. And now every time I talk to a New Age person or a Wiccan, I have even more information than I had the last time. So I want to learn their worldview on the front end. They show me all their cards. And then based on what I already know, I can start asking some more pointed questions toward the end of the conversation that might challenge some of their contradictory belief sets or something like that, or even address emotional issues like, well, it really sounds like you switched over to Wiccanism or atheism or whatever after your. I met an atheist whose dog died. He was unfortunately abused as a child. He had a dog he was very close to. The dog died, and everybody in the church told him the dogs don't go to heaven, and that was basically his best friend. So he goes, "So I'm an atheist," and wow, that is an emotional argument. And now we can talk about that emotion that must have been very painful. And that's just being genuine. I don't have to try to convince him there, but I'm following where the argument leads. And I keep saying argument, the discussion. I'm following where that leads naturally, and I'm just addressing whatever's there.
That's
So
that's
yeah,
that's actually in one of the first uh, lessons that we filmed, right? We talked about how a lot of these atheists, all the way up to some of the most prominent ones like Richard Dawkins,
yes,
do have these very somewhat, it seems like they all have some very
yeah.
painful experiences tied into it.
And you and I both can
Um,
relate with that.
yes,
Yeah.
those require, like you just said, a completely different approach. That
Yes.
is not where
That's not where you argue.
they're, it's not where you argue.
Right.
The you that's where you have to have the ability to speak to, presumably if there's some shame in there, if you
Yep.
can like help dig that out and see where the shame is, or if it's
Mm-hmm.
very painful, if there's anger or
Mm.
there's hurt, you to be able to dig that out first, because um one of the things that we kind of continue to point out with a lot of these is that they're not very well thought through,
Yeah.
right? If you agree that social contractarianism is an extraordinarily reasonable position to take, and
You're
then we go,
almost confirmation biasing that.
yeah, and we go and drop you in somewhere that there's a social contract that if you're not capable of defending your house, then we can just take it from you.
I could
It
do a
falls
couple of
apart.
those places. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, well, it's where was I headed with that? Maybe they hold this belief. It's not
Right.
very well thought through. When it comes to some of the more maybe more specifically anti-God approaches,
Right.
oftentimes it's not because they have evaluated the evidence and found themselves to be in a reasonable position.
Mm-hmm.
It's because there's something painful,
There's an
either
emotional component
personally,
they're just looking
yeah,
to resolve with a logical answer. Yes.
yeah, personally or by proxy.
Yes.
But it's almost never the case that they actually have no beef with the church. It's just that they don't think that it's a good position to hold.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times there's something back there.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Arguing the intellectual actually won't get you anywhere because they don't actually care about the intellectual. They care about the pain on the back end. And I'll give maybe one example, Zach, from my life, but then also tell you something I'm trying to pull in. So a little sneak peek for anyone watching. Um, in regard to, in my own life, I went through a period during college of just a lot of grief and a lot of loss of a lot of relationships partly due to my fault and partly not. But I was just angry at God. And I'm in Christian college at this point, and I'm just like, well, you stink and I hate you, and I'm going to be an atheist. And that was basic. I didn't realize it at the time, but I mean, that's exactly what I was doing. And so I'm trying to reassess, like, okay, how do I argue? But I've already been through all these philosophy courses and apologet. And so it's like, I don't know how, what am I really, I don't really believe this whole natural chemical evolution, chance stuff. Like I can't. So the only reason why I didn't stop being a Christian myself was because I couldn't answer the questions we're talking about in this course. That is why I'm a Christian today. And after a while, I was finally like, well, fine, I'll just be mad at you. And then I'm like the kid pouting in the corner for 6 months type of thing. And, you know, and then you heal and you address. But for me, the issue was grief and pain. And it was the problem of evil. Why do bad things happen? Why do these things, sorts of things have to happen, and loss? And I'm angry with you, God, because you let me lose things I'm not willing to lose. Well, that's an emotional issue. It's called the emotional problem of evil. And the correct answer to that is you sit with someone who's having a hard time and you help them grieve and you just be there with them. And that solves the problem, not an intellectual argument. On the other end of that, Zach, I am trying to get someone who will be unnamed for now, because I can't make any promises, but I am trying to get a certain someone to come in here and do a course on biblical counseling, and break that down. Because when you're talking about sharing the gospel with someone who does have the more emotional issues to deal with, that is a completely different tool set than apologetics. And if you've got how to evangelize and apologetics, and you can address emotional and, what do you want to say, trauma or grief or anger or pain, you can address those types of things from more of a counseling perspective. You're going to be a Swiss Army knife who can really get through to a large number of people. So that's super powerful. I'm
Yeah,
looking to try to get that going here too at some point.
cool.
Yeah,
I had one more thought
do it.
on, and this applies to all of them, and this applies to the Socratic method and asking why and having a genuine, good-natured conversation. If you watch these videos and you walk away knowing that moral relativism, social contractarianism, natural morality, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and all these things fall apart, and you know how, and you take a few minutes and learn all those things, and then you're armed with all of the ways to surgically break these apart, and then swoop in with the superior, which is to
Viewpoint.
ground it. Yeah, the superior viewpoint to ground it. If you come out the gate swinging, you're going to run into the problem of, I can't remember what it's called, what the effect is called, but it causes entrenchment when someone holds a belief to be true, and then
Defensiveness.
you
I mean,
immediately come, yeah, it's defensiveness, sure.
they're just
You,
getting
if you
defensive. Yeah.
immediate if you immediately combat someone's viewpoint, and this is with regards to anything, immediately combat someone's viewpoint with facts, not, we're not talking theories, but with facts as to why that viewpoint is um error or incorrect, they will become further entrenched in their viewpoint. This is
Yeah.
something you see a lot of times with conspiracy theorists.
Very
You can go
common.
watch tons and tons of videos on YouTube where flat earthers are shown evidence as to why the earth is not flat. And they are every single time like, well, that's wrong. And it actually confirms that the earth is flat.
Your
The,
evidence confirms my point. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, to have that good natured conversation where you're asking why and genuinely trying to get to the bottom of their perspective to better understand it, you get to bypass that because they're speaking, and then that law of reciprocity that we
Yeah.
referenced earlier comes into play. They want to hear what you have to say, and now they're asking
After
you. Their
you've
defenses,
listened.
after you've listened, the
Yes.
defenses are lowered, and they're not going to become entrenched if you present something that
Yeah.
is possibly juxtaposed with their
Yeah.
current viewpoint.
Especially when you don't say it as fact. You just say, well, it
Yeah,
seems to me like I do this
yeah,
over the top too when I talk to people. I'll say, well, if it's okay with you, I'd be happy to share my opinion and how I see things. And they're like, okay, cool. I'm not forcing anything on them. I'm just saying this is on my side. You can take it or leave it. Well, now they're listening. So there's a higher likelihood they take it instead of me saying, here's how it really is. And then I'll say, well, it seems to me, and I don't want to force it. I'm not trying to force anything. This is just how I see things. And then share my perspective and they'll go, oh, wow, that's amazing or whatever. And that's a very effective way to get your foot in when you're communicating. That's awesome.
yeah.
Okay, good deal. Well, let's wrap it up And yeah, next week, I don't know what we're doing next week. So there's that. That's the official. Next week, we're going to be doing another awesome lesson on
The fifth argument was resurrection of Jesus, by the way.
Argument in favor. Well, that'll probably just be a different section.
Yeah.
Maybe we can touch on it and then actually do evidence for the resurrection and get into Habermas and different things. So cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining. If you're watching this video, Zach, I will see you later.